Well, if you suspect an employee of fraud, there are some key things you need to remember in terms of the investigation that you're going to carry out. First consideration for many employers is whether or not to suspend, and we would normally recommend that someone is suspended if they're under such an investigation. The reason for that is that you need to get people away from the evidence, you need to stop them from tampering with evidence, but don't underestimate the significance of suspending someone, particularly a senior employee. It's sometimes said that suspension is a neutral step. It tends not to be. People who are suspended very rarely return, and you need to consider that. And you also need to consider whether you have the evidence to back up the allegations that you're making. So we would say that before you suspend, be reasonably sure that there's something really serious that's gone on, and don't speak to the individual until you have that information. One of the questions that employers often ask us is, should I contact the police? And generally speaking, there's no obligation to tell the police about your suspicions of fraud, and there is a significant downside to going to the police first, and it's the police will often want to investigate, and they will ask you to stop your investigation until theirs is complete. The problem is the police investigation could take weeks or even months. And if during that time you are not investigating yourself, you're paying that individual, it's costing you a lot of money, and it's preventing you from carrying out your own investigation. We sometimes say to employers, think twice. Sometimes deal with it internally, deal with your own disciplinary process, and then if you feel the need, inform the police at that stage. One of the biggest mistakes that we see our clients make when they're investigating potential fraud is over computer equipment. Very often we find that clients don't realise the significance of securing computer equipment, and very often will try to find out evidence themselves, laptop computers, mobile phones and so on. Very often by searching inexpertly, you destroy the evidence and you render it not reliable. So what we say always is, if you suspect fraud that might be evidenced by computer equipment, whether that's a smartphone or a desktop computer or a mobile or a laptop computer, secure that first and do not touch it, do not turn it on. Keep it separate in a room and contact a forensic computer expert. They have the necessary software to get the information, to extract the evidence that you need in a way that will be acceptable to the court and will not leave it open to challenge that it's been prejudiced by inexpert amateur attempts to find out the evidence. So another important thing to bear in mind, when you speak to the individual for the first time, try to do so in circumstances where he has all of his computer equipment on him or her, so that you can take it from them at once and they don't have an opportunity to change or modify or destroy that evidence. If you suspect an employee of defrauding your business, the process that you need to follow to actually dismiss them is relatively well known to many businesses. You carry out a disciplinary meeting, and if at the end of that disciplinary meeting you feel that there's evidence, then there's no doubt that fraud would always justify dismissal. One thing that we always advise in these situations is that the key meeting very often is the investigation meeting before the disciplinary, and the reason for that is that the law requires that not only have you investigated the facts, but also that you've investigated potentially the explanations, the justifications, the excuses, call them what you will. To do that, of course, you've got to know what they are, and too many employers sometimes hear those explanations for the first time actually at the dismissal meeting itself, and that's where the mistake very often happens. Remember, in a tribunal situation, in order to show that you acted fairly, very often it's not the investigation into the offence or the fraud that is the most important thing. Very often you win because you can show that you investigated the explanation and the excuses just as much as you investigated the actual fraud.